Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass. Today I'm going to show you an interesting approach to learning triads that could totally transform the way that you navigate the fretboard. Now, I'm going to assume a little prior knowledge of the basic major and minor triads. If you need some help learning what triads are, I've got links to my previous lessons on them below. But basically, as a very quick refresher, a triad is a three-note chord. The most common triads are major, minor, augmented, and diminished, and I cover all of those in the lessons that are linked below. You can learn triads on bass as block chords like this, or you can play them as arpeggios, which is one note at a time like this. And learning them as arpeggios allows us as bass players to make use of chord tones in our bass lines, fills and solos. Chord tones are important because they are the notes of the chord. If we're creating a bass line in a song, the chord tones are the go-to notes because they fit with the chords being played. Chord tones are your friend. You should learn your chord tones. When you learn chords like triads as arpeggios and chord tones, just as with scales, you should aim to see the notes of a triad all over the fretboard. This can often seem hard work for beginners because the tendency is to learn a single fretboard pattern and that's it, you know, one of those little box shapes. So you might learn a major arpeggio like a C major triad as this. And that's it. But those notes of the C major triad, C, E, and G, are all over the fretboard. So you can play them down here, here, work up. They're all over the fretboard, and you want to aim to be able to see those notes in any position and navigate freely up and down the neck. So as one further step, one great way to branch out of that single pattern mindset is to look at the inversions of the chord. And to do this, we simply take a chord like C major, which has the notes C, E, and G, and we play those notes starting on one of the other chord tones. So instead of C, E, G, we could spell the chord E, G, C. So it's the same notes, but we're building up from the E instead. So instead of C, E, G, we get E, G, C. And that is called first inversion. Or we could start on the G, so G, C, E. Again, same set of notes, but starting on the G. And that's second inversion. And this gives us three ways of playing the chord, which we can play like this. Work up. Again, I've linked to another lesson on inversions in the info below, so check that out for a deeper dive into the various inversions available. So inversions can be a great tool for seeing those chord tones in any area of the fretboard. For that C major triad, if I'm down here in this low area, I've got the root position under the fingers, if I'm standing on the A string there, one of those two fingerings there, or a little higher up in this area with the C here on the G string, I might use that first inversion there. And then if I move up a little higher into this area, the C is there on the D string, I can use the second inversion. The first and second inversion fingerings that we generally learn are over three strings. So if I'm going to play the first inversion there, which is E, G, C, I'm going to play E, G, C. So 7th fret A string and then the 5th fret on the D and the G string. There's that first inversion, and then for the second inversion, again across three strings, G, C, E, 10th fret on the A and D strings and the 9th fret on the G string. Each one of those are over three strings, but today we're going to look at learning those arpeggio patterns over two strings. So let's look at our basic root position C major triad of C, E, G. The most common way to play it is probably over two strings like this. So 3rd fret on the A string and then 2nd and 5th frets on the D string. C, E, G, okay? You might also know the arpeggio over three strings like this. So again, same C, E, G, but 3rd fret A string, 2nd fret on the D string, but this time the G as the open G. So, you know, there's two very common fingerings for that C major arpeggio. So if we take that basic C major triad and we try playing it starting on a variety of different C notes on the bass, we can play it here, we could play it here, we could play it here, here. You know, there's plenty of different places that we can play it. So you can play that root position triad, move it around, and, you know, that's the root position triad taken care of. So next, let's have a look at the first inversion of C major. So this is going to be E, G, and C. So as I showed before, on three strings, we've got E, G, C, 7th fret A string, and then the 5th fret for the D and G strings. But on 2 strings, we'll be bringing that C down from the G string there and bringing it onto the D string, which gives us the following: E, G, C. Okay, so we've got 7th fret on the A string, 5th fret on the D string, and then the 10th fret on the D string. So you'll need to shift the hand to make that shift. You don't want to try stretching it. So you've got that fingering, or you could actually shift the G down as well. So we have E, G, C. So I might use both of these or either of these fingerings depending on the context. So again, there we have it: E, G, C, 7th fret A string, 5th fret, 10th fret D string, or 7th fret on the A string, 10th fret on the A and D string. So both of those are first inversion fingerings of C major triad on 2 strings. For the second inversion C major triad, over 3 strings we had G, C, E, so 10th fret on the A and D strings, and then 9th fret on the G string, and all we're going to do is bring that E down from the 9th fret of the G string down to the 14th fret of the D string. So we now have G, C, E, 10th fret A string and D string, and then 14th fret on the D string. Okay, so just see that as just a little fretboard pattern in its own right, and that's it. That's the 3 inversions, or the root position and 2 inversions. So working up from the C here at the 3rd fret of the A string, we have root position on 2 strings. Then we move up to the first inversion, up to the second inversion, and now we're up to the root position again, and we just keep going. Okay. So these 2 string fingerings are great for moving up and down the fretboard. If I move on to the D and G strings instead of the A and D strings, we can play that same C major arpeggio here, starting at the 10th fret for the C major root position. And then we can play up and down the inversions again. So there's root position, then we move up, first inversion, then we're up to the G, and then if you've got enough frets, you can play up to the root position again at the top, or we can move down. So if we're on this root position again at the 10th fret of the D string, move down to the second inversion there, starting at the 5th fret, the G there, and then, okay, so we're covering all of the notes of that C major triad all over the fretboard on 2 strings, which allows us to move up and down rather than always thinking of moving across the fingerboard, because that's what generally happens. You know, you start thinking of C major triad, even if you've extended it right across the strings, you think of it, you know, moving across. If you've got these separate inversions here, you can start moving up and down, and you don't have to limit yourself to the 2 strings. Obviously, you can be working away on here and then switch onto the D and G string there, you know. You're just isolating 2 strings at a time, so it just helps in visualizing the fretboard up and down the neck rather than across all the time. So it's worth spending some time moving between adjacent fingerings in isolation. I'll show you what I mean. So if we're here on the D string, that's either at the 10th fret, we've got the root position C major triad there, and if I move up into this next fingering there for the first inversion, I can practice shifting just by 1 note at a time. So I'm just getting up to the G there, shifting up to the C and coming back down, or coming up through each of the inversions. Okay, just getting used to those 2 positions, and it's just going to help with moving outside of that small limited box shape that you've got there. And it gets you used to position shifts a little bit more as well. And also move down. So here I am on this root position again. The next one down from here is going to be second inversion, starting on that G there at the 5th fret of the D string. So practice that fingering in isolation, this one in isolation, and then just get used to moving between them, and then obviously you can start on a different one. So let's say that we're starting on the first inversion there. We get used to moving up from first inversion to second inversion, or down here. You just get used to the order of them, and that just helps with, you know, feeling like if you want to move out of that area and move up, you're not going to start worrying about where you are and losing your bearings on the fretboard. And obviously then, once you're in a certain position here on 2 strings, you can just broaden it out into 3 strings. So here I am on this C major here, but if I come down, I'm on the G, which would have been the second inversion there. So you just get used to seeing all of those notes in one position and moving up. At the end of the day, it's just those 3 notes just distributed all over the fretboard. But what we're doing here is getting used to them in limited capacity. So you get used to them on 2 strings, get used to them on 3 strings, and then just broaden out beyond that. Okay? So that's the basic idea behind these 2-string fingerings, and the next step is to try working through all of the different major chords. So that's F major, G major, etc. So the G major positions, you know, you could start on, let's say, this G here at the 5th fret of the D string, you know, just move up into the next area. Either of the first inversion fingerings that you want to use there. Whoops. And also, when you are going to address a certain triad, because it's always worth focusing on one triad at a time, don't just try running through them all in quick succession. Think of what the notes are in there. Don't just think of patterns. So when you get to the G major one, think G, B, D, and see those notes on the fretboard as you do it, okay? So here I am, G, B, D. Then we shift up into the next one. So remember, we're starting on the 3rd, which is the B there. So B, you know, B, D, G. And then we've got the D, G, B. Always see those notes in there. And that's going to help with finding the notes, you know. Okay, so I hit that wrong and hit the F sharp there, the 7th as I worked up, and that's why it's always important to keep thinking of these notes, because if you aim for, let's say, the G there, you're less likely to randomly hit that F sharp. So you can work through all of those major triads in an order, maybe like the cycle of 5ths or the cycle of 4ths. So you could work through F, C, G, D, A, E, B, etc. Or you could work through the cycle of 4ths where it's going to be C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, etc. So you just need a kind of order to work through them. But like I said, don't just try and run through them all, you know, in one go. Focus, maybe spend a day on one particular triad. C, E, G, get those notes under your fingers. C, E, G, know the notes. Next day, G major, G, B, D, you know, then D major, D, F sharp, A. You've got to know the notes as well. Then once you've worked through the major triads, you can try working through the minor triads and the augmenteds and the diminished. So for instance, a C minor, we're going to have a different set of fingerings because we're going to have an E flat instead of the E in the C major. So let's say that we start on the C here at the 3rd fret of the A string. We've got C, E flat, and G. That's our C minor triad. Like I said, if you need any help with the triads, there's the lessons linked below. So C minor. Then when we move up into the first inversion, E flat, G, C, we've got a completely different fingering. So we can use this one here, or we can use this one here. And then we're going to move up to the G there, G, C, E flat. Okay, so you can work through the minors, same thing again, work through all of the different root notes there, then augmented and diminished. So that's a lot of work, okay? So if you're ever wondering about what there is to practice, oh, I've got nothing to practice. Well, there's plenty to practice here. So you just work through all of those, and again, as you're doing it, you need to know the notes of those chords. And as you're finding them on the fretboard, you know, as well as these kind of geometric shapes, you are going to be getting to know your fretboard a little better as well. So limiting yourself to 2 strings can be a great way of practicing both arpeggios and chords because it forces you into moving up and down the fretboard rather than across. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel for weekly lessons every Friday, hit the like button, and then visit the Talkingbass website for over 500 more free bass lessons on every topic imaginable in the lesson map. Okay, I'll see you next week.